podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
For more than a decade, Comcast has been committed to bridging the digital divide and connecting millions of Americans to affordable, high-speed internet. But the barriers to get connected go well beyond affordability. That's why Comcast has expanded its efforts through Project Up. Backed by a $1 billion commitment, Comcast is partnering with local community experts to build a network of digital navigators, individuals who help build awareness around initiatives like the government's Affordable Connectivity Program and teach digital skills to get more people online. Learn more at comcast.com/projectup.
Hello there and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, with me, Rich Ferraro. As we celebrate a whole year of Stevie Cooper being the head coach at the City Ground, in today's show we're going to use the international break to have a little bit of a think about personnel and formations and squad size and depth. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from some of our regular pundits, and I will also be joined by the Maradona of the Midlands as we start to build our preferred Forest 11. But without any further ado, let's head over and get the latest from the 1865 news desk.
Hi, it's Callum Castel with the 1865 News Roundup. There's been a good amount happened since the last time I was on the podcast, so I'll try and get through it all quickly. So Sergio Aurier was finally announced, as was goalkeeper Adnan Kanyarich, who has been training with the first team but is likely to play for the under-21s. But we also discovered that Forest were also keen on signing Paulo Dybala before his move to Roma. So Forest just continuing to be as active as ever in that transfer market. Tried to get some out at the last minute. Loic Mbesso was supposed to move to Fenerbahce, but that fell through due to the player's decision. We had a few other bits. Dean Henderson was nominated for the first ever Premier League Save of the Month. We had Oro Mangala's Instagram post explaining that he's near to fitness, which is exciting. The 25-man squad was announced, which did not include Cafu or Lyle Taylor. And we had international call-ups for Renan Lodi, Scott McKenna, Brennan Johnson, Nico Williams, Wayne Hennessy, Dean Henderson to England, Sergio Aurier, Willy Bolly, Cheku Koyate and Remo Freuler. A lot of players for once, and Morgan Gibbs-White and Emmanuel Dennis were called up, but it appears they're both injured and will both be assessed. And Moussa Niakate was called up for Senegal for the first time. So that's really positive. Looks like he should be moving forwards with his injury. And the last bit is that Pep Segura looks like he could be coming in as the sporting director. He already has a relationship with Steve Cooper at Liverpool, and I'm pretty sure I heard that he was the one who suggested Steve Cooper to the main man. So lots happening still, probably a lot more to come. But I'll be back with more news after the next game.
So thank you very much there, Callum. A lot to pack into your news roundup there. Before we discuss that, I'm going to say a big hello to Maradona of the Midlands. How are you doing?
Hi, yeah, I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Thank you for joining me. There were a few interesting nuggets in Callum's news roundup there. The one that stood out to me was Pablo Dybala. Really?
Yeah, I mean that sort of came up this week. I don't think there's much in it from what I remember of the early summer. He'd been linked to Roma quite early on, and I think it would be fantastical to think that he would join Forest. He turned down moves to places like Manchester United and Tottenham last year, so I don't think he's keen on coming to England anyway. And I just imagine his wages must be eye-watering. So I don't think there's much in it. From what I understand, from what I read of the interview, from where it came, it was just Forest put in a phone call just to ask the question, as they seem to have done with a hell of a lot of players this summer.
So with that and the fact that Forest are still making signings, albeit, the new goalkeeper for the development squad, we may or may not come back to that. Is this potentially a sign that, having seemed to have pared back on the crazy transfer activity last season when Steve Cooper and Chris Hughton were in charge, basically coinciding with the Dane Murphy appointment, is it just that the Forest hierarchy are getting excited again and just kind of saying, let's sign everyone if we can?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's. I mean, we don't know. We're sitting on the outside. We don't know the inner workings, but it seems that the owner's son seems to take a very active role in the transfer business this year. So maybe there is that sort of different departments in the club looking at different players. It seems strange to me that an executive like Dave Murphy, and then the other sort of, I've lost track of who we've got at the club now, but football directors and sporting directors and head of recruitment would sort of pass on responsibility to the owner's son. So he may have been ploughing a lone furrow in going after some targets himself, just making a few phone calls. But maybe we don't know what's going on. I mean, in hindsight, it maybe does look like we maybe signed 2 or 3 players too many now. We won't know until maybe somebody releases an autobiography and tells us exactly what happened this summer.
Yeah, I mean, we will come on to the whole idea about the numbers of players and the contribution that they may or may not be able to make to the squad. You mentioned as well these different roles. So we've got technical directors, director of football, we've got head of recruitment, all of those roles, and some of them have been filled and to a certain degree of acclaim from the fan base at that time. And the one that Callum mentioned in the news roundup at the end there was the potential appointment of a sporting director and a guy called Pep Segura. And as Callum said, he is somebody that has got a bit of history with Steve Cooper. Now, that is what makes it an interesting bit of speculation in my mind, don't you think?
Yeah, it makes you think that the club are building something more permanent, and Steve Cooper's position maybe isn't under as question as some reports would let you believe, or some speculation would make you think. It would seem to suggest there's a desire to put a philosophy into the club, so all the way from the top, right the way down to the coaches, and ideally that would go down to the academy as well. So from what I've read on the internet, and it's just, who knows how true it is or if it isn't true, but it seems that the club have distanced themselves from it for the time being. So I don't know if it's true or not, but it seems to make sense in a 2+2 method.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for the benefits of any of you who haven't heard the speculation, so Pep Segura was the assistant and then caretaker manager at Olympiacos quite a while ago, about 15 years ago, but then has also been Steve Cooper's mentor in the Liverpool Academy. And Cooper says, apparently, that Segura helped him to define his coaching and tactical style. Segura has also been the academy and general manager at Barcelona, so has pedigree in the game. And, of course, as we've said there are those potential ties to the Forest hierarchy and also to the Forest head coach. So if this is true, Maradona the Midlands, and we stress once again, we don't know it is, but if this is true, is that a sign that despite recent results and despite all the inevitable speculation that flies around on the internet, is it a sign that the club actually do have faith in Steve Cooper as the Forest head coach?
It does seem to show that, although, I mean, the thing that's sort of overshadowing everything at the moment is the fact that Steve Cooper hasn't signed a new contract, which seems odd considering how in sync everything seemed last season, how the sort of mutual admiration society was in full swing. Everybody sort of loved each other and had respect for each other, and was a fan of sort of all top to bottom players, coaching staff, directors, recruitment. Everybody seemed to be on the same page. So that does seem odd to me. But if it's true, then maybe, yeah, it is all okay.
Yeah, I guess as with so many things, there's lots of things that people will say out there, lots of people who claim to be in the know. And ultimately, we don't know, and we'll return to that theme in just a little while. Let me just refer to the 25-man squad. I think the headlines were Cafu and Lyle Taylor not being included, but Taylor definitely wasn't a surprise, was it?
No, I think it was pretty obvious he wasn't going to be included. I don't think he'll be good enough to play in the Premier League.
What about Cafu?
Cafu, if we hadn't signed so many central midfielders, he could have done a job. But I think it's just the sheer weight of numbers in there now. You've got Freuler, Colback, Mangala, Coyote. Keep on calling him Coyote.
He is a wily player.
He is a wily player. Yates. So there's so much traffic for him to get through before he'd make that appearance. I think it's just a logistical thing. I was interested to see him pictured in the training photographs this week. So he still seems to be involved with the first team squad, because I guess that's down to his personality and the good character he's shown in the past. He's someone that Steve Cooper trusts to sort of be around and not drag the group down, even if he isn't playing.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be loving life in Nottingham. He seems to be loving life at Forest. There's also some speculation. I have no idea how true this is, that he's helping to translate for Renan Lodi as native Portuguese speakers. But I don't know how good Lodi's English is, so I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I don't know either. So yeah.
So thinking again about that 25-man squad. The Athletic published an article. This is obviously, there's an international break. Let's fill the pages with players who haven't played for their respective clubs. And out of our 25-man squad, we've got Serge Aurier, Loic Bade, who, both of them are just very recent signings. Omar Richards, for obvious reasons. And then the only two other notable players were Jordan Smith and Loic Mbeso. And I think the thing that's really obvious there is they're both way down the pecking order in their respective positions, aren't they? So no surprises there, would you say?
No, I don't think so. It's all fairly obvious, really. It's I don't know. But yeah, as you say, I think it's just used to fill up the column inches.
And of course, it's quite possible that the new young keeper may well have been signed to kind of with a view to next season, when we won't have Henderson and Smith will be out of contract, and so it could well be that he's been signed with that in mind. Loic, he must feel like he's kind of never really had a crack of the whip at Forest, but he's obviously stayed at the club despite the speculation about going out for the rest of the season, or potentially on a permanent move. So you'd hope that he will get a chance to at least be involved in the squad, even if his first team opportunity is going to be limited.
Yeah, I mean, barely seen him play, so it's hard to judge. I mean, my overarching memory of him is when he first came into the club, and he had a bit of a nightmare debut. I think it was Huddersfield, or maybe it was from Friday night. I can't remember, a Friday night live game. And I just remember thinking at the time, because the speculation was it cost something like £4.5 million. I was thinking, why have we just done that? It didn't seem to make any sense at the time to spend that much money on a PSG youth player to play in the Championship. And he's never quite looked physically big enough to play as a centre half in the Championship, and it's going to be difficult for him to make an impression. Having come on a reasonable transfer fee, you guess he'd be on good wages as well. So maybe that's preventing him from moving on to France or somewhere to a lower club there. But I don't know. When he first signed, I said on the pod, he'll be one of those players that we're going to let go for nothing in a few years' time, and he'll have done nothing. And I hate that I've been proven correct, but I don't see him coming into the team this season. And I still think he's probably going to leave for a free transfers.
Although I would add two things to that. The first one is that apparently the idea that we paid €4.5 or €5 million for him is wildly. a bit like the Morgan Gibbs White deal, apparently the majority of that is in add-ons. And of course, I don't think Loic's done anything to earn any add-ons, bless him. So I believe that the fee was probably in the region of about €1 million as the basic fee. But again, that's speculation. The other thing that I would like to remind you in terms of what you said about signing Loic in that season was, if we have spent $5 million on Mbeso, we could have spent like $1 million more and signed Ivan Toney. And I would like to say that I think that was a brilliant bit of prophecy by you. And of course, we all wish that had happened.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of those sort of signings down the years where we've been linked to players and they haven't quite come through. But never mind. We carry on.
Yeah. Life of a Forest fan, eh? Just another thing I just want to comment upon. So we've been talking a lot about speculation, about the provenance of the information that we get. And there is something I just want to comment on. In The Athletic, there was an article that just came out in the last couple of days. We're recording this on Saturday, the 24th of September. And in the last couple of days, The Athletic published an interview with Lewis Grabban, former Forest skipper. His last contribution in a red shirt was to lift the trophy at Wembley on that special day. And he's saying, I wanted to stay and compete for a place in the Premier League. He also said that he and Steve Cooper had positive talks about it. And he also said that all the speculation about whether he was after a certain amount of game time or whatever, he said that's never been the case in any of the contracts he's negotiated. And he wanted to continue to play at Forest, which is the club where he's been for the longest time. But it fell down on the contract negotiations, which, reading between the lines, probably means money, doesn't it? So bearing in mind there'd been a lot of fans saying, oh, he won't want to stay to be, second fiddle. He's too old for the Premier League. Maybe Cooper doesn't see him as being part of the club anymore. It puts a new light on some of the things that seem to be truths once they get said enough by people on social media. Am I right?
Yeah, I suppose that, but I think it probably did just come down to money. The wording I noted in the interview was that he said, I wasn't able to agree an extension, which seems to suggest that he would have wanted to stay on similar terms. I don't think for 1 second that Forest would have wanted to give him similar terms because he was one of the big earners in the Championship. Okay, that we're in the Premier League now, he can afford to, the average wage has probably come up a fair amount, but knowing that his age, knowing his past history in the Premier League, knowing that he won't have played that many games, I'm sure Forest would have looked at him and thought, well, yeah, we'd like you to stay, but we can't give you that sort of money. And more importantly, I think Lewis would have known. I think it's slightly disingenuous of him because he would have known, and the rumours have been there for the best part of a year now, nearly, that there were offers in for him from the Middle East, and he would have known that he would have got a very attractive offer from whoever he moves to in the Middle East. And I think I'm right in saying you get that paid tax-free.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
Which makes a hell of a difference when you're on 30 grand a week. They only need to offer him sort of I don't know, I can't do the maths on the top of my head right now, but they wouldn't have to offer him quite as much, and he'd still be as well paid, and he gets to live out an ambition of playing abroad and a part of the world he's obviously got an interest in. So
yeah, and despite Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget yesterday, it's still more financially lucrative to play in Saudi Arabia than it is to be a big earner in the UK. And on that slightly satirical note, I am going to call a moment's pause. We're going to go into a quick break, and we shall be back in just a minute to talk about team selections.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. I'm joined by the Maradona of the Midlands today, and we've had a little discussion about the makeup of the Forest squad. But one of the things that's obviously been causing a lot of consternation amongst fans, as we've had this losing streak, including those very, very disappointing games at home to our fellow promoted teams, Bournemouth and Fulham, has been, well, are we playing things the right way? Now, Maradona Midlands, I've always said that it doesn't matter who the manager is and how much faith you have in them. Even back in the days of Brian Clough and Frank Clark, every week you could look at the team sheet and there's always going to be some room for debate or discussion about the personnel who are selected. I mean, that's just a truism of the game of football, isn't it?
It is, but when a team's doing well, it tends to pick itself. There's maybe one or two positions where you think, well, yeah, I'd pick him over him or do that instead of the other. But in general terms, I mean, last season being a fine example of it, when they're playing well, when everything's clicking and the team's gelled and they're winning every week, it tends to pick itself.
Now, the other thing that I discovered is that Forest have used 24 players so far this season in the Premier League. This is the joint highest with Southampton. And also, I will add in there that Palace are the lowest with 18 players used. So the Premier League is a squad game with the 5 subs rule and so on and so forth. But does it tell us something obvious when we find that us and Southampton are the two teams who've used the most different players so far?
I guess it tells us a few things. It tells us we have quite a lot of players that we can use. From memory, I've lost track of this as I haven't kept up to date with Palace, but at one point they were on the verge of losing a lot of players. I think it was the end of last season. When you get to my age, the years sort of blend into each other. But I think it was the end of last year. So I'm not sure if they've got the biggest squad in the world, because I think it was at one point they were going to lose about 12 senior players. So that might be one thing. The second thing tells us Forest and Southampton have made a lot of new signings. Mm-hmm. And the manager is trying to work out who's best for which position. The third thing, which has been true at Forest, we've had a fair amount of injuries as well. More than sort of maybe you'd expect at this stage of the season. So that's necessitated a lot of change. And the fourth thing, I guess it reflects the new rule with the number of substitutes, where, because we've been losing a lot of the games, we've thrown on a lot of players to try and help change it. So I think all those factors help in contributing to us having used so many players.
And in terms of Forest's 25-man squad plus youth options, there's only really... So we've got Richards, who's obviously out injured, Aurier and Bade, who've only just signed. And then beyond that, it's only really Hennessy and Mbe So, who would maybe be people who would be getting on the bench, I think, and haven't played. So that shows that we are making use of the fact we've signed a lot of players. And what we wanted to do was to widen out that discussion to say, well, everyone will always discuss who should play and how they should play and, formations as well. So we thought we'd ask our regular pundits what their team selections will be. So we're going to first of all hear from Adam, and then we'll go over to Baz and then to Steven to hear their thoughts about the teams that they would select.
So, difficult one. Putting myself in the shoes of Mr. Steve Cooper. This is what I would go with. Now, I'm usually a 3-back man myself, but I think so far I'll go with something a bit different. So, in goal, Dean Henderson, goes without saying. Left back, Renan Lodi. He will come good. He will be better. I think he's been really good so far, but he's obviously a massive talent, and we're lucky to have him. Right back, Gary Williams. I think Aurier, depending on how he integrates into the squad, definitely will provide some competition, though. 2 centre-backs will go for Niakate and McKenna. Don't know anything about Bardet yet, so we don't know how good he's going to be. And I personally prefer McKenna over Worrell. But Niakate is by far our best centre-half. Two holding midfielders. So I'm going to go 4-2-3-1. Two holding midfielders. You know what? I'm going to switch this up right now because it's too difficult to pick two centre mid. I'm going to go 4-3-3 and go for Mangala, O'Brien, and have Freuler as the orchestrator, the deep line playmaker, and have them as a three. And then my front three would be Brennan Johnson on the right, because I think he has a lot of potential to be a right winger in the sense that he does play there for Wales. And I don't know. I think in the Premier League, I think his skill set's better suited on the right. So Brennan on the right, Taiwo down the middle. I'm not seen enough of Dennis yet, and for all the stick that Taiwo gets, I really like him. So I don't think he deserves to miss out. And a bit of a weird one here. I think he has the skill set to do it. Gibbs White as a left winger. However, that front three, I'd say, he can drop into the hole behind Awani if he needs to, and the same way that Johnson can drop into the hole behind Awani if they need to, and sort of interchange behind the striker. And that's what I'd go with.
It's tough because we don't know the players yet. We've not really seen enough of them. But I definitely think we need to change the shape and put an extra player in midfield. And I guess that kind of means sacrificing either one of the back three or one of the players up front. And I would probably rather change the back three. So it would be something like a 4-3-3 or a 4-3-1-2 or something like that. So Hendo's obviously the starter in goal. I think Williams is our best option at right back, but at left back, I would say it should be Loddy, because I like what I see of him, but I don't think he knows the English game yet, so I think it has to be tough to start with. It's centre-half. I'd like it to be a Niakate, but obviously he's out. Out of the ones we've got left, I'd say McKenna and Worrell are probably our best bets. And in a back four, they'll probably perform differently to how they do in a back three. Three in the middle. Ideally, I'd like Mangala to be sitting, but I think Kayate could do the job there. O'Brien has to start because he's just got that energy and drive that takes us places. And I'd probably say Yates over anyone else. So you got Mangala or Kayate sort of sitting, and then O'Brien and Yates providing the movement. And then up front, I think I like a 1 year up front. I think he gives us just that little bit of extra physical presence. And then Jono, although he drifts out of games, he also makes things happen. And there's just the beginnings of an understanding between Jono and Morgan Gibbs-White. So I think it has to be those three. It's just how you arrange them, I think, would be different depending on each player. And I think we need to get better at tracking back and covering so that can become a five in midfield as well.
Assuming everyone is fit, my preferred formation for Forest and this team would be a 4-2-3-1 with Henderson in goal, a back four of Williams, Niakate, McKenna and Lodi, a midfield two at the base of Oral Mangala and Lewis O'Brien, both of whom have been really impressive when they've played this season. O'Brien especially coming off the bench against Fulham and making such an impact. Ahead of them, I'd have an attacking three of Johnson, Gibbs-White and Lingard. Johnson playing out on the right as he normally would do. Gibbs-White through the middle is the central attacking midfielder. And then Lingard more out to the left, but with the licence to come in and play more centrally. I think he could be really effective in that role. And then up front, Taiwo Awoniyi leading the line, but with the trio of Johnson, Gibbs, White, Lingard given the licence to get forward and support and go past Awoniyi and provide a fluidity in the attack. And I think that 4-2-3-1 would provide a good balance across the team.
Okay, so thank you to Adam, Baz and Steven. And Maradona the Midlands, we're going to ask you for your selection in just a second. But
interesting that unanimously people are saying, you know what, the back three probably ain't working at the moment, is it?
No, I think the back three worked really well in the Championship because most teams came and sat back and let us have the ball. And so having the back three meant we could push an extra player or two sometimes into an attacking space in midfield and just give us more options going forward when teams are just sort of stubbornly sitting back and you can't find a way through. In this division, when we're the weaker opposition and the other teams have the better players, I just don't think it helps us out at all. When we're defending it sort of becomes a flat back five, and it leaves big gaps in the midfield, especially when the front guys aren't working back and filling the holes. So for that reason, I think I too would go for the back four, just to sort of make it a bit more of a solid foundation to build on. I think it would cut out a lot of the confusion and hesitation we see from the likes of Joe Worrell, who's sort of been blamed a lot for a lot of the goals this season. It's just, if it's just a simple task, you're going to stay close to McKenna, don't get too far away from him. You're just going to patrol that centre of the 18-yard box. Don't let anybody get through there. Just do your job, win your tackles, win your headers. I think it would just benefit both of them so much.
And, you know, we saw that the back three with wing backs in the Leicester match. We conceded that goal against Leicester in the FA Cup. And Joe Worrell had a torrid time in that because Premier League forwards are adept at getting down the channels and exposing the wide centre-backs. And because of the kind of player Worrell is, he struggles with that a little bit more. Also, because he was a bit more exposed from having first Jed Spencer, now Nico Williams as the right wing backs, who are both arguably more wing than back. Whereas McKenna had Colback sitting next to him, who naturally sits a little bit more. Although, you know, it's worth pointing out, McKenna has been exposed both with Toffolo and Renan Loddy in the team. So you'd go for a back four. Tell us about who you would select. Okay,
well, the obvious choice is Dean Henderson goal. I'd go Nico Williams on the right, Worrell and McKenna, two centre-backs. And then it's, a tricky one. I think probably long-term, the best player that we've got in that position is Omar Richards. But as he's injured at the moment, I would just, for the time being, because I think we just need to go back to basics, and the next 2 or 3 games, just try and get a clean sheet, not do anything too spectacular. I would go for Harry Toffolo at left back. I think there's been a lack of communication in the defence so far in the last few games, and I think it's not his fault, but Loddy, he can't speak English yet, and so that I think that does hinder us slightly. I know he's a player with great pedigree. He's been at a great club and he plays for Brazil. The last few games, you've not really seen that. You've just seen somebody who's quite good at going forward, and then he's sort of gone missing in the defensive area. And Toffolo was doing a steady job up until he got dropped. So he was maybe a little bit to blame for the Harry Kane second goal against Spurs. He switched off then, but it was a hot day and it was late on in the game and he was tired. But I think he would do a steady job there and just help shore up the defence while we're having this sort of crisis of confidence at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you mentioned Worrell and McKenna. I should point out, I did give you the brief that on the basis of players who are available at the moment. So although a couple of the others have mentioned Niakate, realistically, we're not likely to see him in the next few weeks, are we? So you go for Worrell and McKenna. What about in the middle of the park?
Yeah, in the middle of the park, I would go for a sitting two, or well, I'm going to 4-2-3-1 basically. So initially, for the time being, I'd go for Kouyaté and Yates as the two. Kouyaté is just physically a very imposing player, and I think he's got that defensive know-how just to sort of provide a shield for the defence, and he's got experience as well in the Premier League, something we're really missing. So I put him in there. I'd put Yates next to him because he will not shirk his defensive responsibilities. He won't go wandering off anywhere. And plus, he's got that ability to sort of run all day. So he'll provide that drive to provide that extra man in attack when needed, but you can trust him to go back as well. And then I'd go for a 3 in front of them of Brennan Johnson on the right, Morgan Gibbs-White on the left, and then Lewis O'Brien in the middle. Lewis O'Brien, you can trust him to sort of do his closing down, bring the ball out from defence as well, from the defensive midfielders, link up play with the front 2 or 3, and just cover a lot of ground. I think you can see him doing a lot of short passes, sort of interchanging, getting moves set up. And then up front, I would go for Taiwo Awoniyi at the moment. He's looked a bit of an untidy player at points. His touch doesn't look great, but for this section, I had a look back at some of the reports of when he first signed, and a lot of people were saying that he does need work on holding up play. He does need work on his touch, but he'll run all day. He's great at sort of running behind defences, and for somebody who's not played particularly well, he's still managed to get 2 goals. So sometimes it's better just to be lucky than be good. He might just have that knack of being in the right place at the right time and scoring vital goals. So I'd go with him for the next game.
And funnily you should say that, because as you described Taiwo in that way, I was just thinking, well, that's pretty much the same charge that was levelled at Lewis Grabban, wasn't it? Where he can't really play as a traditional number 9 in terms of holding the ball up and being that big kind of target up front, but his movement is very good and his instinct is also very good. So in that respect, although Taiwo's wearing the number 9 shirt, he's more of a Grabban type player in some ways, would you say?
Yeah, a little bit. But I think from what I mean, we've only seen sort of glimpses of him at the moment, but I think this is a charge that I can maybe put to the whole sort of Forest attacking 3 or 4 so far this season. I don't think I've seen them working as hard as I would like in every single game. So I don't think they've been pressing enough. I don't think they've been closing down enough. I think they've made it too easy for the opposition. And the reports of Taiwo in Germany was that he was a tireless worker, and he sort of run behind defences and run the channels and run the lines, and maybe that would help bring in other players as well, create space for the 3 behind him. But going on, just to build on my lineup, I think we haven't really used substitutes very well either. I'd like to see the front 3 or 4 work their socks off for an hour, and then we start using some smart substitutions just as a like for like. So you can maybe bring in Jesse Lingard once Morgan Gibbs-White has run his socks off. You could maybe bring in Mangala once Lewis O'Brien's sort of tiring. You could bring in Dennis for Taiwo. And Sam Surridge, I think he could fit that right-hand side attacking role as well. If people don't trust him to be the out-and-out striker on his own because he's considered too lightweight, I can see him doing a good job in sort of Brennan Johnson's position, because he's the best finisher at the club. And so if he's given the opportunity of a chance in the box, I think he'd take it. And I think we've missed a trick a little bit this season by not giving him a go. With our substitution in general, there's sort of been a slightly sort of desperate substitutions where we've just chucked on all the attacking players, and that's not left us with nothing in midfield at times. So we haven't really been able to benefit from those changes. So I think we just, for the next few games, I'd like to see Steve Cooper use substitutions a bit more smartly, and I'd see a bit more hard work from those players.
I would also say that I think that there's an argument that the Fulham match showed Cooper using, for the first time really, making use of having 5 subs, and not all of them worked out, but I think Surridge and Lingard, even though they weren't as involved in terms of touches as they would have liked to have been, I think the change of shape and their kind of movement and guile kind of added a different dimension to what Forest could offer. Dennis didn't really work out because he only had a few minutes, and his first touch, bless him, he couldn't get into the game, could he? And it's interesting because we hadn't mentioned Emmanuel Dennis so far. So for the record, I would go with Henderson in goal. I would go with Williams and Toffolo at fullback for exactly the same reason that you've put Toffolo in. I think Renan Lodi, and one of our other guys did say it, obviously a great player, but I think Lodi and Freuler good players, but they have struggled to get up to speed with the Premier League, both in terms of the pace and the physicality. So I would go for Toffolo as well. And yeah, until Niakate is available, who did look really good in the first sort of couple of games that we saw, it would be Worrell and McKenna. And I agree with what was said before, which is I think that in a back four, it could be a little bit simpler for them. I would go, assuming he is coming back, I would go with Mangala and O'Brien in the middle of the park. And then I would play Gibbs White in the number 10 role, Johnson on the right, and I put Emmanuel Dennis in from the start on the left-hand side with Taiwo up front. Now, that does mean dropping Jesse Lingard, and it does also mean that there's an accusation that we wouldn't have quite enough in midfield. But against Fulham, in the first half, what I would say is that Steve Cooper did change the tactics slightly after Forest had taken the lead in the first half, and he dropped Gibbs White from being, an out-and-out number 10 to tailing João Paulinho. And so I think Gibbs White has got the work rate and the kind of the intelligence that he can drop in when Forest are needing to defend a little bit. O'Brien, I think, has earned his place. And I'd also say that against West Ham, yeah, we're a little bit, we got the rub of the green with the balls that hit the bar and bounce down and everything. But O'Brien and Mangala outplayed Declan Rice and Thomas Souček in the middle of the park. And I know West Ham aren't having a great season, but that's not to be sniffed at. And I completely agree with you about use of subs. So I'm just going to go over to our Twitter poll, which we ran, which was just asking, on the basis of what you've seen, who would be your first name on the Forest team sheet? I gave people the option of nominating their own choices, but I also tried to choose a player for each area of the pitch. So in goal, Henderson is the obvious choice. I then put Nico Williams, Lewis O'Brien, and Morgan Gibbs-White. And Henderson got 38.8% of the vote. Nico Williams got only 3.3%, which is odd because I think his decision-making has been a bit lax, but statistically he's been really, really good. Gibbs-White got 6.1%, and the runaway winner with 51.8% of the vote was Lewis O'Brien. And O'Brien has that energy and a certain dynamism that I think we wouldn't have otherwise. Don't you agree?
I do, and I think he's got the ability just to be everywhere and not run out of energy. And I see him more sort of that the ability to sort of bring the ball forward, carry it maybe, and release other players. I think I've been very impressed with him, and it was a bit of a mystery why he got dropped, but hopefully he'll be back in now.
Yeah. So we had a few other comments. So Dale did make the point that we shouldn't be messing around too much with the starting 11. Having a settled 11 will allow players the time to gel. I think it's a relatively obvious point, but sometimes we do see managers who do kind of tinker with teams, sometimes for the sake of it. I don't know if we could necessarily accuse Cooper of doing that. And Big Z makes the point of saying that no one has really stood head and shoulders above the rest. But he does mention that obviously there are people saying that the likes of O'Brien, Mangala and Niakate should play because they have been involved in a more positive way and in some of the more positive results than the players who've been going through ever since. I do think that Renan Lodi and Remo Freuler will come good and will be valuable members of the squad. I think they'll all be valuable members of the squad. I mean, the other name we've not mentioned is Julien Biancon, who, if we do go to a back four, could potentially be a very good right back as well as an auxiliary centre back. So lots of options there, which I guess was kind of the point. But anything else you want to add there, Maradona on the Midlands?
No, I mean, but it's a good point that the person made there about a lot of the people being quite. I mean, I found it quite tricky to decide on my midfield because I feel a lot of the players are of a similar ability. So it is tricky. we've brought in players at the time. We thought maybe they're defensive players like Mangala and Freuler, but they're not necessarily defensive players in the sense that they'll stay there and tackle all day and sort of anchor your midfield in that sense. Freuler, I think, is a deep-lying creative player. And Mangala, again, I've seen sort of very similar to O'Brien, sort of like ball-carrying short passes, not necessarily getting those crunching tackles in. So it is difficult because they're quite similar. That's why I chose Coyote in there, just to give that sort of option of a different dimension in there. But so there are options there if we want.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I will just also say that having bigged up Mangala and O'Brien in the West Ham match, the other thing that I really liked is they did seem to have a bit of an understanding already about, okay, you're going to go, I'm going to stay. So partnerships in teams can be really, really important. And with that in mind, I would just say it's been a delight once again to be in partnership with Adam, with Baz, with Steven, and with Callum, and of course with you, the Maradona in the Midlands. So thank you very much. Thank you to you, listener, for joining us in an Apple Top 60 football podcast, as followed by David Prutton. We will be back after the Leicester game, and we'll have a match report and a view from the opposition. So we hope you can join us then.
Social Podcast Network.
Hey, it's me, your Uncle Cooper. Sorry to interrupt your music. I do love music, especially when it's set at a reasonable volume. You know, music is really only as good as your speakers. The same is true for minivans. A minivan is only as good as the tires it sits on. And the button on the screen there, it agrees with me. If you click on it, it'll bring you to all the Cooper minivan tires that'll make your minivan a really good minivan. Go with the Coopers. Cooper.